All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty channel. Now, speaking about the channel, remember just a bit of housekeeping before we even begin tonight's show. If you like the content that you're watching here on the show, whether you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or on X, well, then do me that solid favor. Smash that like button. It helps with the engagement. And as you guys are trickling in, please let me know where you're watching from. It's always a great way of sussing out. I'm not sure why I use the expression sussing out as if I'm suspicious of my audience, but nonetheless, it's a great way of gauging, is a better word, of exactly where this show is being watched from. We're televising this, of course. Wow, that gave away my age. We're televising this, of course, on all these streams, and it is going international. That being said, the one platform which I'm highly encouraging you to not only like the show, but also to subscribe to is, of course, on YouTube. Help me reach my goal of 46,000 subscribers by the end of the year. You help me beat my previous goal of 45,000 by the end of this year. We smashed past that, and I think we're at 45,700 now. So guys, share the content and of course subscribe to the channel. With that being said, a reminder that we have a website. It's down still. AfriHost clears throat, but we'll hopefully get that back up and running at bigdaddyliberty.com. Where are my manners? My name, of course, is Usihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. As always, on a Sunday evening, we wrap up the news week that was, providing you with the compelling analysis you will not get anywhere else. And with that being said, let me bring some voices on to help us provide some of that analysis on the top news items that we've seen this week. Hailing all the way from the Western Cape, someone who's no stranger to this channel. You can find him and his work from his organization Paratus.info. Of course, I'm talking about Gideon Joubert. There he is on screen. Gideon, hello.
Good evening, Sishle, and all the viewers, and it's really great to be back. And listen, to your credit, you've been trying to get me on the show, and I've poor guests that have just been unable to attend like at least 2 invitations. So thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for the gracious invitation to be here. It's always a pleasure and an honor to share screen space with you.
Brother, it's always great to have you on. Definitely a friend of the channel. Someone else who is a very popular figure on this channel. He is, of course, as I said, someone who is not to be trifled with when it comes to just pure quality analysis on all things Africa, trade, defense, and indeed, I'm mentioning the organization he now runs, Mpiyakhe Dhlamini. There he is on screen. Mpiyakhe, Baba, good evening.
Hi, Sihle, and how Gideon, and to all your listeners and viewers as well. Yeah, it's great to be back.
Hey, tonight, it's good to have you on, my brother. And perhaps let's get straight into it. Tonight is not going to be that long of a show because there's really 3 main news items that I want us to unpack. But the substantive nature of these 3 issues is major in their implications for us, the ordinary South Africans. An old friend of mine who passed away, the late Ian Cruikshanks, used to say exactly that. You'd say whenever you're analyzing something, especially on the issues of the economy, always ask the question, what does it mean for us? And we're going to hold that theme across these 3 topics. And let me begin at the top, perhaps what was the most sensational news, even if it wasn't necessarily the biggest news, and that is the ditching, the sayonara moment that Deputy President of the EFF, Floyd Shivambu, literally dropping the bombshell this week saying, fudge it, he's leaving the EFF, he's leaving the dictator-in-chief, my bad, the commander-in-chief of the EFF, and he's joining the charges of Jacob Zuma down in KwaZulu-Natal, namely the MK party. Now, as I said, the news coming as a shock to South Africans and perhaps more so EFF members, because we've always known that quote-unquote axis of evil that is Malema and Shivambu, who run that political party, as coming as a 2-piece combo with the chips and the mashing gravy. I'm sorry, my inner fat man came out there. I'm sorry. Back to the actual topic of tonight. And again, even as I'm saying this, the news, as I say, came as a shock to South Africans, but clearly it was devastating to Julius Malema. This is him at a press conference, basically admitting to the public that, yep, this is what it is, and he's super bleak about the news. Indeed, you can see it in his face. Watch this.
For you to accept the decision of the Deputy President of the EFF, who has voluntarily resigned his positions and did not renew his membership. When he sent me a letter yesterday, I felt the same pain when I received the news of the passing away of my mother. Because Floyd, to me, is not just a comrade, he's a brother. And he will remain a brother even when he pursues his political career differently. We formed this organization together. And I've told him that resigning from the EFF is equal to resigning from himself, because this is his organization. The constitution of the EFF does not allow people to resign and join other political parties and come back to the party. But I've made this offer to Floyd, that the day you decide to come back, you are more than welcome, because you are not a member, you are a founder of this political party.
Okay, there's two things here. Okay, wow. Okay, and by the way, this is the first of two clips that we'll play on this particular instance. But let's begin here, guys. Let me first unpack this. The Malema who we're watching here is a far cry from the Malema who we're so used to seeing, that sort of loudmouth, rabble-rousing, arrogant, they will listen to me, and that character. It's a far cry from that guy. This guy looks super, super bleak. Gideon?
Well, some cheap political analysis from me here quickly, because I'm not a professional at this, but it's something I've kind of been wondering about since the election result. I've got MK and the EFF who are at present the official opposition, right? And what makes them rather unique in the present political situation in the country is that they are very clearly isolated outside of the circle of whatever we want to call this thing that we presently have. There are many names for it, and some of them are very impolite, but the isolation is deliberate. And if I'm a cynic, I'm going to say, look, the ANC got an exceptional hiding at the ballot box. And to their credit, they've been exceptionally realistic about it. There may have been a lack of introspection. There may be a lack of a lot of other things, form, seriousness, all this sort of thing. But there's no lack of them reconciling themselves to the fact that they plummeted by 17 percentage points by voting support. They had like a 30% collapse in percentage points at the ballot, 70% shrinkage. What do you do to get that back? Because now it's becoming a fight for survival, because there's a trajectory and it's downward and it's steepening. Now you can either form a coalition with EFF and MK. You're competing products of the same brand. This is like Burger King going into coalition with McDonald's, going into coalition with Five Guys or whatever the other American burger brand. It's not going to work. Okay, you're competing for the same.
You're strong tonight. Exactly. All right, sorry about that. Go on.
You're the same brand of cola or burger. You form a coalition with your actual real opposition who's ideologically opposed to you, or a working thing. You isolate your competing products, and now you kill them out in isolation. That's perhaps why suddenly VBS is right up there, right? You're having a type of lawfare against the EFF with the intention of destroying them. And A is a party of an 82-year-old man. If Zuma goes, it's very unsure what's going to happen to that place structurally. You can already see the instability within the party structures, that it's not organizationally very well or competently formed or run, that it's very fragile, it's got feet of clay. It doesn't take much to, it's a behemoth. It's a 15% behemoth in a single election cycle, which is huge. a lot of that probably has to do with Zulu unhappiness with the status quo, which is entirely understandable. But how far can you take that emotional state if you don't have something real and concrete underneath it with regards to policy driving it forward? It's a very empty vessel. The fact that Floyd is leaving to go across there might have some sort of impact that I'm not capable of analyzing on the longevity of MK. But things are really not looking, out of all of these things, like MK has been like, we're not sure about the future. It's looking really bad for the EFF now. There's not a lot of, if I were a betting man and they were a horse in a race, I don't think the bookie would like them very much. There's a lot that have gone against them since the votes have been counted that was an entirely different universe for them before the election. But yeah, I'm interested to see Mpiyakhe's views on this.
You've raised some critical importance, and I wanted to throw that to Mpiyakhe. The point Gideon is making is actually a very apt one. It's one which has been rather silent in the mainstream analysis, which is really this. People, especially the mainstream media, let's call a spade a spade. They've been madly in love with the EFF. Its brand was very alluring rather to them, of these two young chaps, or young when they started it, older now, but two young chaps challenging the status quo of Jacob Zuma back then, creating this wonderful tension and conflict in parliament, which of course drives your newspaper numbers. That's effectively what they built their real brand around, being rabble-rousing, being challengers of the status quo, even though at a policy level they are entrenchment of the status quo. But let's leave that aside for a moment. And at the center of that, Mpiyakhe, was Floyd Shivambu and Julius Malema. So now seeing these two split ways, clearly, and worse yet, seeing Floyd Shivambu jump ship to the MK party, as Gideon is pointing out, maybe points to the fact that, with Floyd Shivambu being called the brains of that two duo, right? Malema is the mouthpiece and Floyd is the brains. Maybe the brains have seen the numbers and it's like, hey man, let me jump now to what's going up and leave what's faltering at the moment. Is this an accurate assessment? What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Gideon. The EFF does seem to be in trouble, like the election results and everything else. But I don't think Floyd would leave Julius. Like if Julius didn't do something extraordinarily bad against Floyd. So I think he did something. I think we can. There are media reports, but I think we can safely conclude that Julius did something to Floyd, because the man has been loyal. I mean, there have been so many situations, so many slides, so many times that Julius Malema has taken him for granted, insulted him in public, all of those things. So he has been loyal throughout that. So he wouldn't live lightly. It wouldn't be something that he does on a whim. So for that, I think so there must be the most simplest obvious answer is the conference that they are having in December, where they are having this leadership conference. And I think the main problem with the EFF now is that the EFF builds institutions, unlike MK. Like the EFF builds structures. They build structures that allow them to grow from every election. The only party that has ever been able to do that in South Africa, that has grown from election to election, was the DA. And so they've actually done that. Like other parties have failed to do that. They've built structures all over the country. So the only thing that they haven't managed to do now is actually change leadership. That's the last test for them. So if they could, I think the thing that Malema needs to understand now is that at this point, singing, okay, it's great for us, like people who love liberty, if he stays there forever and becomes a dictator, because he will kill the EFF. It's great for us. But if he wants his ideas to succeed, he needs to realize that he needs to leave. And maybe Floyd is not the best person to take over after him, because I think you deal with someone who's more popular, like someone like Ndlozi, for example, because I don't think Floyd is that charismatic, but I think someone like maybe Ndlozi could be that charismatic figure. And other people, like there's also that EFF spokesperson, I think it's Vuyiso Pambo or something. He also seems fairly charismatic. So people like that could take over after Malema. So he needs to leave power, but he needs to make sure that he lives on good terms, because the organization needs him to play that role, like sort of the role that Nelson Mandela plays in South Africa, because if the Mandela didn't play the role that he has, like there's that example of someone who left amicably, someone who approved of the incoming administration, I don't think we would have the democracy we have today. So I think the EFF did something similar from Julius, but see, like his ego won't allow him to give it at the moment. And then when it comes to the MK, I think that the EFF, I don't think they can blame themselves too much about their results in KZN. KZN was their worst performing province, and it's only because of the MK. So I don't think they can blame themselves too much. It's just because there was a unified sense of anger against the treatment of Jacob Zuma, against the treatment of Zulu people in general, that led to the MK phenomenon. So I don't think they can blame themselves for what's happened there to the EFF. It's just that the test will be the next election. What happens after this election? So what happens in the coming election? Do they recover or do they keep falling? And I think the way they are panicking, the way they are doing things, it ensures that they will keep falling. But I think the main thing is just for Julius Malema to step down. I think that's what the EFF needs right now. If they don't get that, then I think there's more trouble to come for them, because people are just, it's a nature of all organizations. When things go wrong, and they keep going wrong, people want to change the man at the top, whether that's justified or not. That's what people want to do. If people allow people to do that, they leave and you lose talent that way. So that's what that day has been great at. They were able to manage the transitions from Tony Leon, Helen Zille, Musi Maimane, even though Musi didn't like it, but they were able to change him as a leader without too much of a fuss, and it actually worked for them. So yeah, the EFF needs to do that as well as even the ANC as well. They were able to change Mpiyakhe when the time came. So they need to learn from these other more successful organizations. Otherwise, they'll die. There's no other way.
Absolutely. And again, before we leave this issue, there's two more things I want us to chew on. And I want to introduce just a piece of analysis here that basically no one has pointed out, in the mainstream or even here amongst us as podcasters. And that's twofold. And bear with me, just give me 30 seconds to flesh this out. The hard left in South Africa has always been around cumulatively, in other words, in total, between 12 and 15%. If you go back to our first elections around 1994, where you put together the PAC, back then there was the Azapo, I can go down the line of various hard left political parties. They're the ones, if your memory is or if you're around back then, who are saying the radical stuff like, oh yeah, the moment democracy comes, we're going to push these whites into the sea, yada, yada, yada. The ones who came in with that sort of rhetoric. Those guys cumulatively have never been more than between 12 and really between 10 and let's call it 15% at its zenith. To which, as they broke apart, as they dissipated, as their own internal failures as the various hard left parties saw them dissipate. And why? Because South Africans, generally speaking, are not hard leftists. They may be center left insofar as what they want for themselves and how they view that relationship between them and the state. But most South Africans, generally speaking, are quite sane, centrist type individuals. And the hard left is off-putting to them also. So because of that, primarily, that's always been the glass ceiling the hard left has had in this country. It's why they always come and go. They ebb and they flow. Hence, the PAC has only recently made a comeback in this electoral cycle, and that's even then barely. So where am I going with this? For a long time, since the formation of the EFF, those individuals who are part of the hard left have sought a home, somewhere they can actually coalesce and abandon their old brands of political parties because they didn't exist anymore, right? So Malema was quite smart after he was kicked out of the ANC to then fashion himself as the uber leftist charismatic leader in the country. And why? Because he recognized he had two captive markets. One, young people who are in the ANC Youth League who are going to leave with him, right? Whatever that percentage was, right? So he knew he would have those guys to bring him into the echelons of power as an opposition party. And the other grouping that he saw that he could collect and place into the EFF with a common brand, a common message, the 7 cardinal pillars, and that nonsense communism that he pushes, that Marxist-Leninist communism was exactly those people who now didn't have a home, right? The hard lefties who used to be a part of the APC, PAC, Azania movement, you name it, Azapo, etc., etc. So it was clever politics in that regard. And it's also why I always say to people, never call Julius Malema stupid when it comes to politics. He's very astute and he knows that game very well. He knows how to exploit it, at least. He's smart enough to exploit it is what I'm trying to say here. So where am I going with all this? Because I'm saying that there's always been a hard cap on that, I'm of the view that the hard left, even via the EFF, was never going to be more than 12%. And its regression is not surprising. And why? Because the other brands of hard lefties were quite aggressive in this past election in saying, we're back, like the PAC, like the ATM now, which is a more new formation, like the APC, for example. And those parties are back. And sure enough, they probably siphoned off some of that hard left support from the EFF. That's why I would argue the EFF saw a regression.
Especially.
Oh, there you go. That's, yeah, they came in their visibility suits. Shout out to Harry Potter for that reference. But they literally came, you know, as a you know, hidden behind a fig leaf. But here's the point I'm getting at, and I want to throw it to you guys in a moment. It's that failure to realize this, which is now seeing the EFF falter. Number one. Number two, for someone like Floyd Shivambu, he would then have also looked at those other leftist oppositions in terms of deciding where to jump ship and go, no, minnows. I can't go back insofar as who I jump ship to. So the one party he would join is the party that at face value pretends to be ultra-leftist, at face value speaks the language of expropriation and the people shall share this and that, namely the MK party. But in real terms, who the MK party is made up of are the most state capitalist, rent-seeking, corrupt lot. So they have no interest in communism. They just speak that language. So this is what I think this is the calculation Floyd Shivambu made. He said, look, these guys are not actually true lefties. They're not true commies. They're just a rabble of Zumites. It's a cult, essentially. So he might be doing the calculation that leaving the EFF to join MK allows him to steer MK in a leftist direction using the base that is built, which is more Zulu nationalist and really not even Zulu nationalist, more Zuma nationalist. Let me call it that. These are people who are just pro-Zuma in every respect, who believe a messianic type Jacob Zuma. So guys, I want us to just take briefly 30 seconds just to look at that. I want to get your view on this, that the calculation for Floyd is twofold. Number one, Zuma is 80-something. It is foolish and naive to believe that Zuma is going to be leading this party for the next 5, maybe even 10 years. The chap is an octogenarian, if I'm getting that right. He's on his way out. I'm not wishing that on him, so please, MK people, don't flood my comments. I'm just saying it is reality. So that's the first calculation he made, which, okay, I'm leaving a party where I was a senior leader, a second in command. MK needs that kind of personality, that profile. MK needs someone who has experience in building an organization from the foundation up, which with the head of Malaikum, Floyd has that experience, number one. That's the first calculation. The second calculation, which is the most critical one, is on policy. He looks at at MK Party, a rough ragtag grouping of wannabes, corrupt lots, etc., and says, someone actually needs to give them ideological guidance. So all the rhetoric they spew, someone has to back that up with hard policy, which he obviously thinks he'll play that role in because he did that for the EFF. Now, this is the two areas when people ask the question, why did Floyd Shivambu leave? I would argue it's those two opportunistic reasons. Guys, let me throw it to you quickly, and then I'm going to play a clip of Julius Malema responding perhaps to questions around, does he think that Floyd Shivambu leaving his party will see the EFF split up or even disintegrate? Guys, quickly, your quick feedback on that. Gideon, I'll throw it to you quickly.
I'll quickly jump in. So a third thing is also, I mean, he sees MK moving across. He instantly grows the size of his office or the size of his potential office by nearly 70%. Just on pure number of support, right? The EFF stagnated at about under 10%. It's not breaking through that glass ceiling in two national elections later. It's not really governing anywhere. Municipally, MK nearly took KZN province on their own. It came exceptionally close and had to a very complex and fragile coalition agreement to kind of snatch victory from the jaws of defeat for everyone else there. I mean, and they almost had a sole mandate on having KZN. It's as a cult, it's an incredibly powerful. It's flexing a lot in the space of nothing. So if you're being a pure numbers person, his prospects look better, just on that basis, I think.
Mpiyakhe?
Yeah, I think you're right, Sitley. There is an opportunity in the MK. I'm not sure if Zuma wants to take advantage of the opportunity, because it doesn't seem to care about actually growing the MK and making sure that it's a stable, sustainable party. He seems to care more about taking over the ANC. So I think the biggest liability for the MK is Zuma, and the MK is nothing without Zuma. So the MK is going nowhere. So I think ultimately it would be a mistake for Floyd, because the MK is going nowhere. Because like I said, Zuma is not interested in growing a party, and and the MK is nothing without Zuma. So without him, like, the opportunity can't be taken advantage of, even though there is a real opportunity that they could take advantage of. There is a real gap in South African politics for a sort of that Africanist politics that you had in the 50s with about Robert Sobukwe, and the MK sort of hinted at something like that with the likes of John Hlophe. But now they're sort of reversing themselves. Now, if you're getting someone like Floyd, who is a Marxist-Leninist, so there is that tension as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's the tension, or the opportunity, at least from Floyd's perspective, that he's looking to exploit, to say, actually, I have a chance here to shape these people ideologically into what he wants, and then gain a position of influence to lead that. So again, we have to keep an eye on this, because as I said earlier on, Malema is not stupid politically. He can see the writing on the wall. He can see the risks that this poses. And why? Because also, let's be frank here, most of the individuals in the EFF come from the ANC, the very party that has, over the last 30 years, been at the center of experiencing splits, breakaways, and disaffected people forming their own thing. So they're keenly aware, as the EFF, of that very risk of splitting, prominent individuals splitting to form their own things and siphoning off support. Again, don't take my word for it. This is Malema speaking at that very same conference, press conference, highlighting his awareness of the dangers of the split, or of the leaving.
It's not the only one. Jimmy Manyi has also resigned to go.
I'm sorry, I'm going to quickly pause it here, because this is funny for me, and I mentioned this. Excuse me, I just lost my guest there. There we go. I mentioned this on Thursday's episode. It's funny. When Jimmy Manyi, aka Mzwanele Manyi, was joining the EFF, there was a whole big song and dance that the EFF did about saying, no, you must abandon the name Jimmy. He is an African. You must use Mzwanele. If you call him Jimmy, you are colonialist, blah, 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 blah. The moment Mzwanele Manyi says, I'm leaving the EFF, screw you guys, I'm going to MK, suddenly he's Jimmy again. Okay, I'm sorry. Roll the clip.
Join MK, and there will be many others who are going to leave the EFF because they've got their loyalty and support to the Deputy President. So fighters on the ground should be prepared for more people to follow, and this should not serve as a point of collapse for the EFF.
Let me just unmute myself. As I said, guys, he's not stupid. He's keenly aware of the risks that will come to this. That over basically the next few weeks, over the next few months, there will be people defecting from the EFF and then loudly announcing they're joining MK. Guys, maybe final question on this topic before I move us on. There's two questions. It's a two-parter. Number one, is this risk a real one? Is it something that you can foresee as something that the EFF should worry about, number one? And number two, there is an inherent tension also by having EFF people defect to the MK party, considering the history between these two parties, or at least the history between the EFF and the leader of MK party, Jacob Zuma, is one fraught with tension and conflict. The EFF built its name in one regard by the pay back the money, if you remember that scandal. Let me just quickly go to this piece in Daily Maverick, which actually highlights and refreshes our memories on that, because it will speak to whether this is realistic, or is there any long-term staying power of a Floyd Shivambu or any other EFF people in the MK. This is from the Daily Maverick. Its heading here was VBS pals Floyd Shivambu and Jacob Zuma snuggle up. That's a gross image, but nonetheless, struggle up following EFF's broken bromance. And I wanted to go to this section here where they remind us, and they give a little subheading and say, if you can't beat them, the old adage, of course. In 2017, Shivambu and EFF leader Julius Malema met in a penthouse in Sandton with convicted, this is about the criminal charges also, the criminal accusations being leveled against Floyd Shivambu and Malema. But nonetheless, giving us background, according to the latter, that's the former VBS and convicted chairperson Uchifiwa Matodzi, in an explosive witness statement, because remember, he turned state witness after he was convicted, after the fighters had whipped up a public storm about the bank's granting of a 7.8 million rand loan to Zuma. This, of course, came after revelations that Zuma had hoovered up 250 million rand in public funds on upgrades to his sprawling private estate at Nkandla. With chance of payback the money, this is what I'm saying should take us back memory lane, from the EFF bench is still ringing in the national consciousness. Matodzi's witness statement claims he bought silence from the revolutionaries who stopped criticizing the deal when they scored, that's the EFF, a 16 million rand loan in stolen VBS funds. End of quote. Let me come back to my guest. Guys, there's a lot of context here around, number one, Floyd leaving and the charges that he's likely facing and the risks associated with that to his political career and that of Malema. And of course, going to the very party then, which ironically, he as an EFF member chastised the leader of, Jacob Zuma, for being a thief. There's great irony here, Mpiyakhe.
Yeah, I think South Africans are very forgiving when people flip-flop in politics. Like, we almost expect that. We don't trust our politicians that much. We don't expect them to be honest all the time. So yeah, I think he'll be forgiven for it. But I think your deeper point, Sihle, there is some truth to it, that people will be there will be more people leaving. But I don't think it's just because of Floyd. I think it's more to do with what you said, that the EFF itself, the left itself, is in trouble. So I think what happens to the left really depends on what the ANC does at its next conference. So that's ultimately what will decide what happens to the entire left, who they choose after Cyril, because for sure Cyril is going, and he's not only going as ANC president, he's going as the country's president, because that's the president that has been set since Thabo Mbeki left, that's in his second term. So like in no way Cyril Ramaphosa will survive as the South Africa's president after the ANC conference, and the EFF themselves have said that. So this will be the next major event. So this election, we are still dealing with the earthquakes from the election, the aftershocks from the election. But after the election, the next piece of major political earthquake that we are going to get is the ANC conference, and then we'll see from there what flows from that. So everyone is basically preparing themselves for that. Like the things that Helen Zille has been saying are not they are not like stupid. They are not just her shooting off. She has a very specific strategic goal with what she's saying. She's trying to engineer a split in the ANC. She's trying to get rid of the left essentially and leave the core center in the ANC that they can negotiate with, which would then empower the DA and put the DA ANC combination in power for forever and ever. So that's what she's trying to do. So everyone is trying to play to the ANC conference. The EFF as well, they are trying to win the ANC conference in the sense that they want the ANC conference to be the red line under the line under the GNU or the coalition government. They want it to be the end. So their conference has to set the tone for that. The EFF's conference has to make sure that the idea puts them in the best position to benefit from what happens after the ANC gets rid of Cyril Ramaphosa in 2027. So it's going to be everyone is going to maneuver, and then we're going to have the ANC conference, and then all hell is going to break loose. That's what's going to happen next. and everything can still change. Like even though like the EFF seems to be down and out right now, everything can still change based on what everyone does between now and then. So I think that's basically what's going to happen. And then Floyd, the MK, I have no hope with the MK. Like I know Jacob Zuma, we've seen him as president. The man is paranoid. The man is not a stable leader. He's not a good manager. So he's the best. The only thing Zuma has going for him is his popularity. But in terms of running an organization, building it up and all of that, he's very bad at that kind of stuff. Like he nearly destroyed the ANC. He nearly destroyed SARS. I mean, like which leader of a country would destroy the revenue generating part of the government? I mean, like that's how bad he is. So no one has, like the ANC has been bad, but they may always make sure that
SARS on the man, Mpiyakhe. Stop telling me about his good parts. You know, like.
I mean, he's popular, yes, that's his good part. But I mean, he did destroy SARS, so I don't think he's a man who can build institutions. He can build political parties. So I don't think the MK is going anywhere. But unless I don't see it, because even the people that they have, the voters, they're not there for ideological reasons. So Sitla, you were right saying that the left has a cap of 12%, because you can't count the MK vote as part of the left. Those people didn't vote for expropriation without commutation. They didn't vote for all of those leftist policies. They voted for Zuma. So that's what it is.
Exactly. And I think that's what Floyd is calculating. Look, let me enter that party, fundamentally change its nature to one of a leftist, Leninist organization, so as to basically use that base that they've built, that Zuma nationalism base, to make it a leftist one. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to work, as Mpiyakhe is pointing out, because people don't tend to vote for that. There's a very specific subset of South Africans who vote for that. It's usually academics and, the most economically illiterate amongst us who basically believe this idea that, as long as we put government in charge of everything, if it runs everything, that everybody will be fine, and it'll pick winners and losers in society.
Are you saying academics are the most economically illiterate parts of us?
Yeah. Two categories, one characteristic. But Gideon, as we wrap up this section, there's a few nested features that Mpiyakhe has brought up, which I think are critically important. The first is everybody's looking towards ANC conference and how the chips will land in that, because whether anybody likes it or not, Ramaphosa's not coming back. He's had his 2 terms already, and someone else is going to be in the running. Now, I'm not going to ask you to crystal ball this, and the who's for now is not so important, other than there are 2 distinct groupings vying for influence here. It's the GNU coalition partners, led by the DA broadly, who want this status quo to remain stable until the next election, to which the ANC iteration that must come after Ramaphosa has to be pro this, which is sort of broadly center-left, center. We're going to discuss the reforms as we go into this thing. Then there's the other side, who they've self-named themselves, by the way. They've self-described themselves as the quote-unquote progressive forum, or caucus, the progressive caucus. EFF, ATM, the Colored Congress, blah, blah, blah. They suddenly became lefties when they got into power. It's me, but okay. And a few others, right? MK also being a part of that mix, who, even though they pretend to be like, we don't care about the GNU, they're lying. They want power. That is the very basis of their existence. They need power. In fact, lefties define their own existence through power relations in society, fundamentally, from an ideological perspective. Talk to me about your view on this as we wrap up this section.
So I'm actually going to keep my view very short on this, because everyone is hanging on for dear life on this freight train and trying not to fall off it as it tries to get through 2 critical gates. First gate is 2027. That ANC party conference. There's a huge number of moving parts there. A lot of what happens depends on, because everything that happens in the ANC is self-preservation of the ANC. But then you've got the individuals in the ANC that are driving their own agendas of self-preservation and access to patronage networks and all these other stuff. So it's a complex thing to try and crystal ball. It's very difficult. The reality of it, though, is that come 2029, I don't think it matters who's in charge of the ANC. I think what matters is that most of them are probably going to understand if they can kill off the EFF, and if they can facilitate the collapse of MK, there's a 25% chunk of the vote that's politically homeless, and all they need to get back the ball back across the line and be in charge without needing a partner is they just need to get about 10 to 11% of that 25 percentage points. So it's in their best interest to kill off their brand competitors and very aggressively try to push into that market space. Now, whether they do that as lefties, whether they do it as RET faction, whether they do it as reformists, it doesn't really matter. They've got their old enemies in the GNU with them, and they've got the supposed bedfellows, ideological bedfellows, who's actually their competition, outside in the cold and isolated, busy self-destructing to some degree. How do you feed that? So I do not expect, if I were the ANC and I was only self-interested, I would do everything in my power to not welcome EFF and MK into anything. I'd try to them as much as possible. I'd be as hostile to them as possible, and I'd try to engineer their demise as quickly as possible. So come 2029, I'm the only on the ticket that represents the broad base that might care about these types of issues. But that's just me.
Absolutely, and as always, we'll keep watching, this issue because it's going to develop. This will be the defining moments of South African politics over the next 5 years, and it's very important that people wake up, pay attention, and be a part of the process. I've said this before. Even my own cynicism has sort of taken a back seat. People know me as Mr. # politicians are trash. But in reality, what politicians do over the next 3 years, let's call it that, is going to have a fundamental impact on our quality of life as South Africans. And on the one hand, I can continue being the outsider, complaining and, giving analysis and all the goodies, but sometimes getting involved, influencing people on the ideas, including the politicians, is critically important. So on that basis, we'll keep being involved, rather. We'll raise our voices on these issues. And as always, we'll be watching. With that being said, let me move us on to our next issue after this quick message. Yes, as I said, a very quick message. That just allows you to be able to play adverts in between this in a more not disturbing way. Guys, I'm going to move us on to what is perhaps for me, really, if we're going to talk about the two more substantive issues, it's crime and unemployment in this country. I'm going to go to crime first because some of the stats we saw coming out this week, and I don't mean official stats, but responses to parliamentary questions have been absolutely shocking. And it's not to say that crime stats in this country aren't ordinarily shocking, but some of these numbers leave one, with a chilling sensation on murder in this country. The data coming out from a parliamentary response to the DA. Let me just quickly put this on screen and read it verbatim, and then we'll discuss it because there's a two-parter to this. As you saw in the heading of this video, of the show, 2/3 of murders, let me just make sure it's on screen. Yes, it is. I'm sorry, folks, let me come back to it by doing that. 2/3 of murders go unsolved in South Africa. Where's this data coming from? Well, apparently nearly 76,000 of the 115,000 murder cases in South Africa between the years of 2018 and 2023 remain unsolved due to insufficient evidence and a shortage of trained detectives. We'll come to that point in a moment. There's another article I want to read about that. The crisis highlighted by the DA reflects, of course, broader issues in the country's law enforcement and, of course, a high crime rate. The last kicker here is that about 2 in 3 murders in South Africa go unsolved due to insufficient evidence or leads, according to official figures released by the governing party on Sunday. Police closed without result more than 76,000 of the almost 115,000 murder cases that were recorded in the country in the financial year between 2018 and 2019, as I pointed out. Now, even as I'm saying this, let me just quickly stop that. That's an interesting arrangement. Let me go to the other article I speak to, which gave numbers on that issue of the lack, or rather the shortage of detectives, which baffles me because it's not like we don't have the budget for it. But nonetheless, let me read the numbers and then I'll throw it to my guests. This, of course, from a business tech piece. Ad removed. Okay, cool. A business tech piece, detective crisis in South Africa where 2/3 of murders are unsolved. Same issue, but different angle. South Africa has over 8,000 vacant detective positions, limiting the police's ability, of course, to solve crimes, serious crimes, violent crimes. Responding to a question from Rise Mzansi MP Umakashulekana, Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, who has a lot on his shoulders, by the way, said that the South African Police Service currently employs 22,413 detectives. However, there are currently 8,594 vacancies for detectives across the country. Of all provinces, the KwaZulu-Natal has the most vacancies. I'll come to why that's important in a moment. And the Western Cape is in second place with 1,555 vacancies. End of quote. Chaps, as we're listening to these numbers, Gideon, I'm going to come to you. First things first, harrowing stuff. And there's two people or two groups, subsets of people who I feel the most for here. Number one, and this will be unpopular opinion, but fudge it, it's true. I actually feel very sorry for those police detectives and SAPS officials who are busting their asses off right now, but because of historical poor political leadership and poor managerial leadership, have seen them have to bust their ass often with the odds against them, such as not filling vacancies, not training new detectives, misallocating budgets to things like VIP, primarily, instead of core policing functions that keep the public safe. And speaking about the public, they're the second subset of grouping who I'm worried about. Guys, let's think about those 115,000 family members who have lost someone to murder and having their cases likely drag on and then even be closed by SAPS because they simply cannot make headway in these cases. Gideon, this is a proper crisis.
It is a proper crisis, and the reason I look entirely unsurprised is because I'm not, because I came across these numbers 2 years ago when I did my first report for an overseas client on the issue. It was about an 80-page report on it, and I did a new one, a refresher on that one. So I have an open invitation. I'm not being sarcastic. This is a friendly one. If anyone from the DA or the government would like some insight into this crisis, I'm happy to go visit them and sit with them and go over the numbers for them, because you can source absolutely everything from their own departments reports. And if you read the SAPS annual reports, the SAPS crime stats, and the MPA annual reports, you get the picture that the police, on an annual basis, it's going well, presently bring about 15% of murder dockets to the NPA for prosecution. The NPA does a very good job of successfully prosecuting between 78 and 80% of those, meaning that your successful prosecution rate for homicide in South Africa is about 11% of all cases, meaning that 89% of all murder cases go unprosecuted, unsuccessfully prosecuted, which is significant. Rape's worse, I think, and this is without correcting for the rate of underreporting in rape, you're sitting at about a 8% success prosecution rate, and trio crimes is the worst one. That's robbery, residential premises, robbery, non-residential premises, and vehicle hijacking. They have a successful prosecution rate between the three that averages under 3%, right? Closer to 2.49% successful prosecution rate, meaning that's actually, if you think about it, that is you're in margin of error territory there, statistically. So you could almost say that the prosecution rate for trio crimes is insignificant. That's how bad it is. Detectives, is there a shortage of detectives? Let me put it to you this way, right? I think Ian Cameron pointed this out. There are detectives out there that have 300 dockets on their desk at a given time. To give an example of what 300 dockets look like in reality, if all you do as a detective is every week make a 5-minute annotation to the docket that you have not had the time to further investigate this docket, you're merely making a note in it, explain the latest movements, which have been nothing, and it takes you 5 minutes. To annotate 300 dockets takes you 1,500 minutes, 25 hours. That is more than 3 working days that detective is going to spend of his 5-day week just annotating the dockets. He hasn't time to investigate. That leaves him with 2 to 3 days a week to do the actual investigation. right? That is what 300 dockets does to a detective department. You put 300 dockets on a detective's desk, you bury him. That's it. That's done. What's he going to do? How's he going to investigate any of those crimes? Which means that the detective is likely to only focus his energy on the cases that he is probably the 5 or so out of 300 that he might be pretty sure he's got suspects, he's got cooperative witnesses. These are the ones he might be able to solve, meaning that 295 cases of the 300 on his desk go without any attention given to them. And the thing is, this is not static. We have 80 murders a day. His murder dockets keep piling up while he's trying to solve these 5. It is once you get behind that drag curve, getting yourself out of it takes exponentially more effort than just what it would have taken you just controlling the problem from the first place. So calling it a crisis, that's a great name for
it. You'll forgive me, because even as you're saying all of this, it's hard not to see those two subsets of victims that I mentioned. I'm sorry, guys. I'm saying this because I know how people are very cynical now, SAPS, and I get it. I understand why. Unfortunately, we've had near on 10, 12 years of a complete asshat of a police minister who treated SAPS as a PR exercise more than a crime-fighting institution. And I use the word institution on purpose because that's what law enforcement should be. It's a culmination of various specialized institutions that are supported by a visible policing ambit, right? Efficient, very capable, lethal to criminals, those who violate life, liberty, and property rights in the country. That's what SAPS should be. They should be the pride of the nation insofar as being the defenders of life, liberty, and property. And because they haven't been that, because of the nature of our politics, and yes, I pin it all on politics, because people often forget that, it wasn't just shitty, excuse my language, ministers, but it was also shitty characters who were deployed into managerial positions at SAPS. Remember A1, Jackie Celebi, he's my friend, finish and klar, referring to a corrupt relationship with Glenn Agliotti, a gangster, a known organized criminal gangster, or A1 Ria Pierre, who I used to call Mamfundisi, because I used to ask myself the question, what the fudge are we doing with that sort of, loser social worker character? Should have been Americans' wet dream, American lefties' wet dream. Just send a social worker into situations of crime. But again, I don't want to lose this very serious point, because Gideon, you've hit the nail on the head here of a systemic corrosion of SAPS, which is placing immense pressure on people who actually care about their jobs and can make them ironically cynical. I mean, if you're a detective sitting with 390 cases and they pile on daily, you would become cynical too, because you simply cannot keep up with that. It's unrealistic. Mpiyakhe, I want to throw it to you, and I'm going to bring it back to Mpiyakhe. Pardon me, too, Gideon. Mpiyakhe, we've heard these numbers being rattled out, and it's very easy for us to just be like, what's 395 cases? It's just numbers. But there's South Africans behind every single one of those cases. People are hoping against hope that on the one hand, there'll be justice for their family, or alternatively, community members who are watching an accused murderer almost roam free, consequence free, and they simply can't do anything about it.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I'm glad that you have Gideon on it, because he's the person I listen on when it comes to, these type of issues. And yeah, I think another thing is, I just wanted to say, we've mentioned Ian Cameron. I think you, Gideon, and Ian Cameron should get together, because he's in the DA now. And I think you guys need to get together and discuss some of these issues, because I think you could do a lot of good work. But anyway, I'm just going to come at this from the point of view, from a normal person's point of view, because I'm not an expert on this issue. But I mean, we all feel crime, so we all want crime to be solved. These numbers just tell me that we should expect murder, violent crime, robberies, all of those things to get worse and worse, because government is not really turning the corner in any meaningful way. Things are just piling up. And so you sort of understand why it's rational for anyone, it's rational to have vigilantism. It's rational for people to decide to take care of criminals, even terminate them permanently in cases, even though that's not ideal, because you want the guy to have a trial to defend himself and all of that. But if government is not providing that service, what can you do but deal with the problem? Because like if you don't deal with it as you come across it as a community, then it just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse, and it doesn't get solved. And it escalates because criminals can see that, okay, I was able to do this, then I can do much more in future, and then there will be no consequences. And then they also have competition from other people who says, okay, they see this guy being successful in crime, then it's okay, then I can also get into this. So we need, like, these numbers are shocking. Like they should really like shock all of us. I mean, our unemployment is the other major issue that we have, but I mean, crime. I think at this point, crime has to be number one. I think at some point I would have said crime is number two, unemployment comes first. But at this point now, I have to say crime is number one because it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Yes, unemployment as well gets worse and worse and worse. But crime, I mean, it's like being unsafe is like nothing else. Feeling unsafe
Absolutely.
in your own community, in your own country. I mean, I can be unemployed, yes, and I can be poor, hungry, and all of those things. But feeling unsafe is just such a fundamental thing. Like you can't get investment when you feel unsafe. You can't get a job. You can't get all of those things. So I mean, we really need action solutions here, and we need people to not have egos when it comes to these issues. So I'm glad that Mpiyakhe is gone. People call him Begutwala because he seems to be more focused on alcohol than actually solving crime. But yeah, I'm glad he's gone, and I'm glad that we have someone like Ian Cameron heading that portfolio committee on policing, because I would really encourage Ian, because as someone who I respect and someone who was hoping would become the next Minister of Police. I'm hoping that he doesn't see his role in the same way that an ANC portfolio committee chairperson would see it, to just support the government, but they actually see their role as to actually fight for us, to actually ask those tough questions. So if he sees that his role that way, then I think he's going to work with people like Gideon and others who have been focused on this issue and really come up with solutions and put the government's feet to the fire on this.
Absolutely. And even as I throw it back to you, Gideon, because I do want us to have the conversation on what needs to happen, because we all say this, but there's no meat and potatoes usually given to why we say this, which is there is a fundamental need for deep reform within SAPS, and a political bravery to do it. That's why I'm being very charitable to Senzo Mchunu. Not because I'm saying, oh, he deserves it inherently. No, but because, he has an opportunity here at the beginning of this term to actually say, you know what, my role is as a police minister isn't to be flashy and be the minister of condolences, rocking up to crime scenes and commiserating with families, but rather to be like, okay, can I have a serious conversation with the existing management of SAPS? Can I speak to, as Mpiyakhe rightly says, bring in voices from outside, expert voices who can actually guide the minister, say, Minister, this is the political leadership you need to provide. These are the individuals who you can target to drive a vision, a mandate of effective policing, and these are the structures that you must advocate for, to which the National Police Commissioner must, not maybe, kind of, must implement in order to shape up SAPS. Because I know I'm going to come into conflict with a lot of people here. I really genuinely believe SAPS has really dedicated individuals within that unit, that organization, who are itching for changes politically that allow them to get the shine in order to steer that SAPS ship. So, Gideon, I want to pose this question to you, it's twofold in nature, and it being twofold can also become 4, 8, 5, 9, 12-fold, because it's a hydra in its nature. But what are the reforms that are critically needed at this juncture? Number one, at a political level, so where your Senzo Mchunus, your Ian Cameron, thank God he's where he is now, is required, political level, civil society, and us as the public. How do we do this?
Great. So I'm going to give you a proper answer on this, and then I unfortunately have to drop off because I have to do fatherly duties. But political reform is very easy. There's two things. First is politically out of politics, out of the cops as much as humanly possible, and political micromanagement, over intervention. The police minister has absolutely nothing to do with the day-to-day running of that organization. But at the same time, the oversight function to ensure that there's a competent leader at the very top of that organization who has the full support of the state in order to do very difficult, hard, and far-reaching reforms all the way down a very complex organogram, with also the understanding that deep, meaningful reform on the steps is going to take a lot of time. There's a lot of bad things that need rooting out. But you still have good, dedicated people in there. So identify who they are, empower them to act, and not only do their jobs with maximum effectiveness, but also help you clean up that ship. A big thing to do, decentralize as much as you can of that functionality, devolve policing down to municipal level, to regional level, to provincial level. This the what you can do from a police minister point of view to involving everyone else. Now the line doesn't get blurred, but where the machine comes together. This is something that the KZN Provincial Police Commissioner is very good at certain things, and I have to give him credit for being exceptionally effective in certain things. Unfortunately, his public statements seem to indicate a lack of understanding of others, though. The peeling principles of policing being one, in the public are the police and the police are the public. A policeman is duly a member of the public who is undertaking the duty of law enforcement and policing on a full professional basis, and that you can only police a community with its consent. And that trust between the community and the police is the key factor that everything hinges on. The moment that trust doesn't exist, forget about policing. It's not happening. That's where you get degeneration into vigilantism, and there's a hard task there, because about 22% of the public trust the police, upon the latest indication, which means that 78% don't. Okay, so that's a heck of a mountain to climb. You have a 78% distrust level. You need to use your community policing forums. They're not your talk shops. You need to use them as a point of directly involving the community as much as you can. Pick trustworthy people and deputize them. Not just your eyes and ears. Use the communities as an actual crime-fighting resource. Be clever about that. There are so many structures, templates, things that work that you can borrow from. There are active community safety and security programs being run in places all across the country that you can copy, paste, adapt. You can embrace them as an official program within SAPS and how you deal with communities. You can formalize relationships with good private security firms, and you can turn them into another arm of policing. You can make that an official thing. Put the process through it. I mean, Panya Lesufi, for all the things we can say about him, the crime prevention wardens are actually a fundamentally great idea. We have lots to say about execution and also, but as an idea and a concept, it's a fundamentally good one. That's something that can be embraced. So there's a lot that can be done, but it requires a few things. It requires understanding, it requires a desire to depoliticize policing, and it requires patience, and it requires the guts to go of some things and say these are functions that can and should be devolved. We are not the old SRP, where everything is from Pretoria, and where internal stability was a key thing because we need to keep a political regime in power. This is now about polisiering or policing, community policing specifically. It's an entirely different vehicle for an entirely different era, an entirely different country, and centrally managing that as the only way, as the only vehicle, is probably largely to blame also over here. And on that note, I unfortunately have to go, but I hope I'm leaving you with something to discuss.
No problem. And a major thank you to Gideon Joubert, who of course is the head honcho over at Paratus.info. Gideon, thanks, my brother. I appreciate it. And yeah, that's Gideon Joubert. But yes, Mpiyakhe, what Gideon is pointing out here is critically important. It's about priorities. Who do we prioritize really as a functional state? Because for as much as, you know, you and I are both opposed to a big, bulky state and an overarching state, and yes, we're also opposed to us being a police state in a sense, it doesn't negate the fact that though of those limited roles of the states, law enforcement is a critical one. Maintaining law and order is a critical one. Nothing, you made the point, nothing else happens in society if people are not safe. And I think people sometimes lose perspective, both for the unemployed individual and the employed individual. Being in a safe environment is critically important. Picture for a moment, as an example, that young chap, who's just finished matric, he's starting out, maybe found a nice job at Mug and Bean or, at Ushaga Marine somewhere. Sorry, these are all Durban references. But something which, might keep him into late hours. Let's say they close at 7 or 8 or 9. That chap must then walk from his workplace to the bus terminus or the taxi terminus. He has to be safe there. Someone has to guarantee his safety. He has to go onto that public transport and then jump off to wherever home is, usually a township or a informal settlement. He has to be safe there too. And this is where the state is meant to play that absolutely critical role. Maybe in your last take on this issue, how do we begin to get this right, Mpiyakhe?
Yeah, and thank you to Gideon for really covering the important reforms that are needed. But what I would say is like when it comes to the fiscal issue, like my position on the fiscal issue has actually been nuanced over the years. I've been saying like repeatedly over the years that we need to fund the police more, even though the state as a whole needs to cut fat, but the police needs to get more money. Like not just the police, the courts, the intelligence services, our embassies, overseas foreign affairs, and as well as so those are the main issues that needs to get more funding, because as the SANDF as well, the military. So we need to better funding, even as we reform them, like maybe to reform some of the management structure. Definitely the SANDF is too top heavy. But even if after you do that, you still need to give it more funding. Like the money that police earn in this country is peanuts. Police don't earn anything compared to the crime that we have, and there's a high turnover rate. Like we lose good cops every year because they don't get paid enough. They leave and go to the private sector, and because the job is dangerous, they don't get enough political support. So yeah, we need to get more funding into the police. And that's what's going to be required as well to implement the reforms Gideon touched on, is to get that funding so that police are capacitated to do that. So we need that, because what has happened over the years is we've actually been reducing, even before we had this current fiscal crisis, we've been reducing funding in real terms for police, for the courts, so for the criminal justice system as a whole, including the NPA. So we've been reducing funding, as well as SANDF. We've been reducing funding for them in real terms. So the number that they get in the budget every year increases, but it increases at a slower rate than inflation. So it means that there's a reduction in real terms. So we need to increase it massively now to catch up for all of those years. And what we've been doing, we've been prioritizing welfare. We've been prioritizing, things. Okay, yes, health is important, education is important, and grants are important as well. But we need to really have a good conversation about as a country, and realize that without safety and security, without a good criminal justice system, without a good defense of our borders in the form of SNDF, and the ability to effectively implement our foreign policy through the Foreign Affairs Department as well as SNDF, then as a country, we can't have a government that can't do the basics. Those basics need to be done before we can think about things like welfare, think about things like grants. So we need to have that conversation as a country, and it's going to be a difficult one because it's going to lead to some cuts. It means we'll have to cut some consumption expenditure that we've been doing. We need to cut some fat jobs in the civil service in order to fund these other important priorities. So we need to do that urgently, and it's long past due now. We've been talking about this long enough. It just needs to be done now, and it needs to be part of the GNU that we need to do these things now. We need to start funding these other important priorities.
Absolutely. And again, as I said, it's an issue which we're not just going to talk about here on the channel. I'm looking to produce a 30-minute special on this, 30 to 45-minute special on this, on South African crime picture, and give the new minister an opportunity to set out what will be his agenda politically. So we're hoping to get him, an interview with him, just to talk us through what, as I said, what's his policy agenda for SAPS? And of course, how does he do what Gideon rightly pointed out, which is to empower those individuals who are dead committed to actually fighting crime in a real way, whether they're within SAPS or outside of it in civil society or even the private sector. in the country, which is doing a very great job itself of being that extra arm, if you will, of law enforcement in this country. So we'll, as always, we'll be watching. All right, guys, we're going to go into our last segment here. We're sort of running over a self-ascribed time here, but we'll be very brief on this one because unfortunately it's reared its head once again. The latest quarterly labor force survey indicating that unemployment in this country has, yes, gone up, unfortunately, once again. What are we referring to? Let me go to a press release from the Department of Labor. Let me just quickly show you Stats SA, insofar as I mentioned, the quarterly labor force survey. Now, this comes out 4 times a year, of course, tracking the trends in employment rates or the unemployment. As you can see, the heading there, the official unemployment rate was 33.5% in the second quarter of this year. Now, the above changes in employment is referring to, of course, the employment and unemployment numbers, to which unemployment numbers are also subdivided twice. There's an official rate and a expanded rate. Now, the expanded rate simply includes those individuals who, when they're polled on this issue, indicate that they've been discouraged from even looking for work. So that number makes it even greater. But nonetheless, the above changes in employment and unemployment resulted in the official unemployment rate increasing, as I mentioned, by 0.6% of a percentage point from 32.9% in the first quarter of this year to 33.5% in the second quarter. Now, in comparison, to quarter one of 2024, the expanded unemployment rate in Q2 increased by 0.7% to 42.6%. End of quote. Mpiyakhe, again, I don't want to use the word crisis. It's become quite the word I've thrown around here quite a lot, but this is scary stuff. We often sometimes forget that we're talking about real people who have real everyday issues, to which them at least having an income to be able to address the everyday issues would be greatly beneficial. However, over 33.5% of them, in fact 42%, don't even have that income.
Yeah, it's terrible, and I think it's the second biggest issue after crime now. I think after lockdown, it used to be the biggest issue, but after lockdown, because crime just went up in a massive way. So I think like unemployment, but it's still a major issue. Like inconsistent in every survey, South Africans will tell you the same thing. It's crime and it's unemployment. Not these other things that politicians talk about. It's not, like monopoly capital. It's not land. It's not any. It's just these two issues: crime and unemployment. And the politicians don't listen. So yeah, we need to solve this. And I mean, this unexpanded unemployment rates is actually a better reflection of the reality than the 33.5%, because
Absolutely.
I mean, you have to count the guy who's given up, who's been trying to get the job, and who's actually decided, no, I'm just going to sit now at home and give up. And even that number is an undercount, because if you think about it, it doesn't count the people who decide, okay, I can't get a job, so let me go back to school. So I think we should be counting all of those people. Basically, the unemployment number should be telling you who is over 16, wants a job, but can't get a job. It should tell you that, but it doesn't at the moment, because they like statisticians and politicians, they massage the numbers. But it should just simply tell you that, like, who's over 16 wants a job but can't get it. But it doesn't tell you that at the moment. Yeah. So, but yeah, even with the official numbers, it's a massive crisis.
I was about to say, oh, yeah. Sorry. I was just about to say, maybe as we taper off our conversation, let's talk to that individual who's in that 42.6% expanded unemployment rate. Let's talk to that person insofar as they might be wondering, what does this mean for us, besides being unemployed, not having an income? And not having an income, by the way, has imtelela, I can't think of imtelela in English, repercussions, consequences that go far beyond not just having a salary or a wage. It goes to issues of, are South Africans building household savings? Because household savings, remember, is what improves over time the quality of life of individuals. So are we having South Africans be able to build household savings? The clear answer is no. on that one.
Yeah.
And the data is absolutely crystal clear on that one too, to the point where more people are becoming state dependent, including people who never thought in their lives they'd ever become state dependent. But okay, let me come back to where I wanted to end off. There are structural issues. There are structural issues that must be addressed if we're going to get South African economy humming, number one, and number two, it absorbing a largely unskilled and semi-skilled workforce, which is not competitive internationally for various reasons. So those are all structural reasons for unemployment. Mpiyakhe, top 3 reforms that you would want to see that will get people into jobs.
The top one is just get rid of all labor regulations. Just say, get rid of them, we're done with them. We don't care if someone takes a job that pays them 500 rands a month. It's a job. They thought it was their best option. So we don't care. Like so if someone accepts a job like that, it means that they decided that, okay, out of all the options that I have, this job is my best option. So it should tell you that all the other options are worse. So where they are now, being stopped from taking this better option is actually worse. So I don't know how people think about this, but they seem to think that it's actually worse to take this to take your best option rather than to have no income. But anyway, so allow people to the freedom to negotiate contracts. So just eliminate all labor regulations. Second reform would be just to lower taxes so that businesses to de-risk the process of starting a business, because taxes and including payroll taxes, of course, so that it doesn't so for example, so the importance of lowering income taxes, for example, in terms of creating jobs. Yes, it will because if someone earns 20,000 rands and they pay income tax, that person can be worse off than someone who earns 17,000 rands and earns no income tax. So it means that a business can get skilled people for cheaper, if that makes sense, because they don't have to pay their income tax or their payroll tax. So the income tax is important for that reasons. And I think the other option would be just making sure that you deal with the crime situation. But I know that government is not going to be moving quickly in these issues. So I think in terms of crime and unemployment as well, like people have to take charge, you can't wait for government. You have to do things yourself, because I know how it's like to be unemployment. It's the worst situation you could ever be in. Like it's completely dehumanizing. So I would say you have to take the initiative. You have to go to employers and say, hey, I'm unskilled. I don't have money to go get a skill, but you can give me a skill by working, if I work for free for you. So maybe all I need from you is maybe if you could just give me maybe, I don't know, just enough to get a meal a day, or even if you just give me nothing, I just need to get this skill. Like if people can do that, and if companies can be receptive to that and say, okay, even though this is not exactly legal, but because we see that this, we're trying to help, it's a win-win situation. We're trying to help you get this job and learn this skill as well so that you improve your life. Then we'll do it as well. We'll allow you to take this opportunity. So I think if there can be something like that, a meeting of minds where everyone just decides we are going to ignore the labor laws, I think that's the way out of this. Because if we keep listening to what the government is saying, we're going nowhere. And it's going to lead to a serious crisis. What happens when more than 50% of South Africans, which might already be the case, by the way, don't have jobs? What happens then? So these situations should scare us, because then you're talking about a potential revolution. I mean, they say that when Hitler came into power in Nazi Germany, unemployment was something like 20 to 30% or something like that. So our unemployment is way above that now. And they're talking about what would be the expanded definition of unemployment now, because the new definition only came about in 1996 or something. So the way unemployment was measured in the past was more rational. So if that's the case, then for Nazi Germany, so what does this say about us? Like what kind of crisis could we face? And I think that's how you kill these hard left parties like the EFF and the MK, by just making sure that everyone has a job. So that's my thing. Yeah. So we need to fix this. It's a real risk for the country.
Nothing is more of a risk, an existential risk to the existence of hard lefties than a property-owning, prosperous, non-racial, I must say that part again, and an income-earning society, the very thing that lefties are opposed to insofar as they want the state to control all of those things. They fear a society that is property owning, as I said, income earning, prosperous, and non-racial. Now, maybe as we wrap up, let me give quick 2 points, and then we'll call it an evening.
Yeah.
What do we do to get people back into work? I think you've hit the nail on the head. We cannot have a luxury suite of legislation and policies that are designed to quote unquote protect labor when the country itself is not producing laborers. It doesn't make sense. You're creating a tension, what Marx, if I can quote Marx in this one instance where you got it right, what he called a reserve army of labor. Where it becomes individuals who are outside of the formal workplace who then entrench a culture within the workplace of protectionism because they view the large number of unemployed individuals as a threat to their own employment prospects or continued employment as employed people. It's that mentality that builds from high unemployment levels, which makes employing new people actually quite difficult. It's self-defeating in its nature. And we'll unpack this in other episodes. So you definitely remove the legislation that makes it difficult from making society be more employed people and less unemployed people, number one. Number two, on tax, absolutely. You want a society which is taxed as least as possible so that a state spends as least as possible and therefore spends it on things that matter, which are core to the state's function. So not on sports, arts and culture and all these other things. No, spend it on things that really matter.
Like that.
No, but it's true though, in the sense that the real tax on people is government spending. It's not a tax necessarily, albeit that is also true. It's that and inflation. So that, let me come back to the second point on less taxes, allowing people to then build what I called earlier on, those household savings from more of their income. And by the way, I saw the comment here by Ulo Brau Mtagat. Absolutely. In an inflationary environment, you want people to put money towards savings, and savings isn't limited to stashing money away in the bank. It's also in assets, people investing in homes, because that is a preserver of wealth, investing in gold, and other investments which are available but are not available if you're not earning an income, and more specifically, not keeping more of your income thanks to less taxes. So you want less taxes. And the last reform I would push in particular is really this. You want to create an environment of people who are free to hire and fire on the one hand. So yes, the policy environment, but also free to create businesses. Actually free to create businesses. It should not be difficult in South Africa to start an enterprise, because often it's those informal, what we've broadly called informal enterprises, but really they're just businesses, who are the absorbers of the unskilled and the semi-skilled. Let me be precise and specific. Where do you think young Black individuals in the township are more likely to find work? It's not in Fortune 500 companies where there's wonderful labor legislation for them, or factories, which should be the case, but rather in those informal businesses in a township, setting up a little kiosk, selling sweets, selling cigarettes, selling amakwenya, or whatever the case may be, or even in what is largely called informal industries like the taxi industry. Most young Black individuals in the township, I was one of them, will often find their first job in being what's called ustapa, or the door operator. I don't know what ustapa is formally in English. The conductor of a taxi. Again, is that person earning minimum wage? No. But to that person, that 40 Rand a day, that 50 Rand a day is tin fish and bread every evening to bring back home, and the ability to save what little he can, what little he can over time to then find his next opportunity. And also it does the second thing. It imparts a culture of responsibility in that individual, waking up on time, showing up, being presentable, understanding how to work with the public, being trustworthy with money entrusted with you, etc., etc. These are all soft and hard skills that are learned on the job. And that is what we should be expanding to every industry in the country, so that young people who make up the largest percentage of unemployed people should be learning these skills on the job. Again, these and other things are other issues that we'll keep an eye out on as we wrap up the show. As always, Mpiyakhe, as I like to do at the end of every show, how do the folks find you on your social media? And of course, what are you working on at the moment?
To see the work for the African Free Trade and Defense Society, you can go to aftadefsoc.africa. We've sort of hit a pause for a moment because I've been busy with with studies. So I've just been working on my studies, trying to improve myself there. But yeah, we haven't stopped. We'll keep coming back to it when we can. It's just it's very it just gets you have to go through a lot of hard work in some courses. So yeah, it's that kind of situation. But yeah, that's where they can find the latest work when we are able to publish it. And then on my social media as well, I'm available on Twitter as well as Facebook. But so you can find me. You can search for on Twitter. On Twitter, it's Mpiyakhe Dhlamini, and then on Facebook, it's Paratus Dhlamini. So you can find me on those.
Excellent. My brother, thank you so much for having joined us this evening. That is Mpiyakhe Dhlamini joining us all the way from Natal, KZN, out in that part of the world. Mpiyakhe, thanks. And as I forget my little swoosh there, thank you for watching the show. Thank you for being a part of the show. As always, your comments were flighted at the bottom of the screen. I'll be greatly interested in hearing more of your views. What do you think about these three issues that we covered recently? Guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me just quickly say something to you guys. There is a lot of change that's going to happen over the next few weeks. Nothing's cast in stone yet, but yeah, just look out for a few changes. Announcements will be made once things are literally put in ink, so to speak. So exciting changes on the one hand, but change nonetheless. But with that being said, on the way out, guys, do me that solid favor, smash that like button, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or on X. If it is on YouTube, well then subscribe, please, to the channel. Help me reach my goal of 47,000 subscribers by, did I say 47? 46,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And of course, find us at our website, please, at bigdaddyliberty.com, especially once we get it up and running. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. And as a reminder to you, as I like to say, never trust a commie.